Is the NATO alliance, after all this, isn't it now damaged goods?
I think it's more than that, Andrew. I think it's dead in the water.
Davos is winding down. There's a framework agreement over Greenland, and Donald Trump has his Board of Peace, so everyone can breathe easily again. Well, not quite. The old world order may be over, but the shape of the new one isn't clear. Germany's Chancellor Friedrich Merz has echoed Canada's Prime Minister, Mark Carney, warning that the old order is not coming back and urging the world's middle powers both to go their own way and to band together. A crisis meeting of EU countries today has one diplomat declaring, quote, "Our American dream is dead." Meanwhile, peace efforts over Ukraine continue. President Zelensky has just been meeting President Trump in Switzerland. This is Mr. Trump speaking after the meeting.
We hope it's going to end. A lot of people being killed. Last month they had 30,000 people killed, 30,000 mostly soldiers. And it's really a war that has to end.
What do you expect? You about joining your Board of Peace?
We didn't discuss that.
Do you want
What do you expect from
We
the
didn't
meeting
discuss
tonight?
that.
Why
You should accept the charge, Mr. President.
And how did the meeting go? I mean, you've obviously been
I think
working
the
on this
meeting was
meeting.
good. I think the meeting with President Zelensky was good. The meeting with Russia, that'll take place tomorrow. They're going to be meeting with President Putin. I had a very good meeting with President Zelensky. Everybody wants to have the war end.
Well, not much new there from the president. The big outstanding issue is still the territorial issue. If there was peace, what would Russia get to hold on to? What, in addition, may it get to what it's already got? All that still seems to remain unresolved. Let's talk about what's been going on this week with my panel today. Gerry Baker, Wall Street Journal's editor-at-large. Katy Bowles, Washington editor for the Times and Sunday Times. Gerry, let me come to you first. I'm going to ask you both the same question, though. You've been in Davos. What's your main takeaway from, what shall I call it, a rather hectic week?
Well, Andrew, I mean, it obviously has been a week that's been dominated by the spectre and then the reality of Donald Trump. I come to Davos. Honestly, Andrew, I've been coming to Davos for almost 20 years. I come largely these days.
You are Davos man.
I am Davos man, and I come largely these days because just as I get to the point of thinking that maybe Donald Trump and these populist right-wingers are really the disaster that people think they are, I come to Davos to be reminded why Donald Trump exists as a politician in the first place, why the populist right has done so well, and why it still has a lot of legs in it. The fact is, look, this is still the sort of self-appointed global elite who are still kind of horrified at the idea that their world is being somehow challenged by these dreadful people like Donald Trump. And I think my main takeaway is that they still think that somehow they control the world. They've had a little bit of a victory this week in that Trump has clearly backed down over his ridiculous Greenland plan. But I don't think in the end, my big takeaway is that this struggle by populists who represent people who are not here at Davos, who are not part of the global elite, who are not the wealthy, successful, dominant people who believe in all the nostrums that these progressive elites believe in, there's still a struggle. There's still a fight on. There's the old guard is putting up a rear guard action, I would say, and Trump is part of the challenge to it.
Katy, what's your main takeaway?
Well, it's my first Davos, so we have slightly different perspectives.
So you're not quite Davos woman yet.
No, I'm trying.
She will be.
After 3 days, but yeah, I've got just about the right shoes, but there's some work to go elsewhere. But I think for me, it's just how much Trump is just dominating the entire conversation and the mood every day. So today in Davos, it's definitely a lighter mood than the previous days because, as Gerry said, there's relief on the Greenland pivot. There's some eyebrows being raised on the Board of Peace. Of course, no European countries really present or included in some of the parts of that. But people are more relaxed because of Trump. And when they are more stressed, it's because of Trump. So every conversation, it feels like it inevitably, at least after a couple of minutes, gets back to Donald Trump.
Now, they're breathing a sigh of relief in European NATO at the moment. The invasion of Greenland isn't going to happen. But Gerry, is the NATO alliance, after all this, isn't it now damaged goods?
I think it's more than that, Andrew. I think it's dead in the water. And I don't think it took... I think it took Greenland. Look, it's been dying for quite a long time. I know, it actually arguably it obviously won the Cold War, magnificent alliance, the most important alliance in global history. It had, some remarkable successes in the 1990s in the Balkans. It had the extraordinary extraordinary event of September the 11th, 2001, when NATO members backed the United States and engaged Article 5 for the United States. But since then, Andrew, it's been steadily dying. And the reason is the United States is not ultimately, and it's not just Donald Trump. The US is pivoting away from Europe. Europe is economically, I don't want to say dying, but it's in a very, very poor way. America is looking to the rest of the world. And the idea, it was true during the Cold War, the idea that today Americans really would be willing to send their sons and daughters to die to stop Russia from taking over Latvia or Lithuania or even Poland, I think is frankly fanciful. I don't think the notion of NATO, which is not just Article 5, but was built around the idea of collective security, that the US essentially would come to the defense of countries that were attacked. I just don't, again, it's beyond Donald Trump. I don't think that's conceivable. So I think NATO, the Europeans have got to get their act together and decide whether they want to send their sons and daughters to die in the event that they're attacked. I don't see the Americans being willing to do it anymore.
Well, Katy, if Jerry's right, we don't know if he is, but if he is right, European NATO, along perhaps with Canada, needs to get its act together and to build a defensive alliance that could operate without the United States in its premier role. Is there any sign they have an appetite for that?
Well, I think as ever, the question is, does the rhetoric match the action? So the rhetoric this week from Emmanuel Macron talking about, the end of a world order, a changing world, and Mark Carney, who I think outside of Trump, his speech has been the talk of the conference when he says, medium countries have to stick together. It does feel as though there is a sense that things have to change. I think it always comes down to, is that because the European Union then has to have several weeks of discussions and months of formal process, and then will there be some type of fudge? But certainly, I think that European diplomats here are rattled, and there is a feeling that, they might have avoided a disaster here over Greenland. But it's not as though there was a blip and then it's back to normal. This is just a reminder of the situation they're in, which is an unpredictable president they cannot rely on.
The Mark Carney speech was interesting, Jerry, not just because he said that the middle countries, of which Britain would be part, as well as Canada, most European countries, middle countries, should get together. But he also said that they should have changing priorities: food, fuel, defence. And this was quite significant coming from someone who has hitherto been a fully paid-up member of the liberal global elite.
Yeah, very much. And of course, the liberal global elite, interestingly, Andrew, absolutely lapped it up. I've never seen such a sort of mutually kind of orgiastic kind of response to anybody here. It was like people were sort of weeping in the aisles at Mark Carney. Finally, our saviour had come from across the
Maybe
water.
It was road to Damascus conversion for them.
Very much. But the thing is, Andrew, I thought the more interesting thing that Carney said, which is true, I take issue with some of the things he said. The more interesting thing I think he said was true, was that this idea of a world order run strictly according to rules-based international order, working on the basis of international law, where strong countries abide by international law and restrain themselves by codes and alliances and international institutions. He said that was always a fiction, partially false. He described it. It was more than that. It was a fiction. The United States obviously worked in that system because it benefited it. When it didn't benefit to work within that system of international law and an international system, for example, when it wanted to topple any number of rulers, which it did during the Cold War and then afterwards, it didn't worry about whether or not it was breaking international law. When it invaded Iraq, by the way, a war I supported and now deeply regret, it didn't have international law on its side. So I think there's a bit of a myth, Andrew, and Carney talked about this, that somehow we're entering this terrible new world where powerful countries will do what they will. The famous Thucydides quote, the powerful will do what they like, and the poor the weak must suffer what they must. I think the world has pretty well always operated like that. I haven't seen much evidence of strong countries basically restraining themselves from doing what they want to do, if they can do it. That's always a big conditional, if they can do it. So I'm not so sure that this brave new world that we're entering is really all that different from the old one.
Katy, what have you picked up about the reaction to Carney's speech? I'm particularly interested in this change in priorities, because in a way it would mean sidelining of net zero, a lot more money on defence, and instead of covering farmland with solar panels, you would actually grow a lot more food. All of that follows from what Carney said. What did you think? What were people saying in Davos about it?
Well, people, as Jerry said, were talking very admirably about the Carney speech. So you would go to events in the evening, the day of that speech, and this was just before Trump arrived in Davos. So they're almost bracing for the avalanche of Trump and saying, speaking in softer tones, saying, if only Carney. So I think he was seen in some ways, although you've had Gavin Newsom here, the California governor, who's almost been the anti-Trump taking the fight. I think Mark Carney has come to symbolize what they would like the leadership in the Western Hemisphere to be. But to your point about some of the things that his speech logically you follow from, and if it is the case that these European countries cannot rely on America and they have to make some quite difficult decisions themselves on spending, perhaps that is inevitably where you get to. But I think when you think of the old Davos and the new Davos, and I would count old Davos, those have been coming for many years. Obviously, Nigel Farage has also made his Davos debut this week. Trump has been here before, but I think is interesting. The Americans, the reformer, they are not in many ways mingling with the old guard in quite the same way. And there seems to be two parts of it. And I think the old guard want to talk about Mark Carney, and he's become almost, the poster boy for what they would like to return to in a few years' time.
Jerry, what about this Board of Peace? Do we take it seriously, or is it just a Trumpian rush of blood to the head?
It's just a Trumpian vanity, and it grew initially supposedly out of this idea to try to establish peace in Gaza. I've just been in an event where a lot of Middle Eastern governments, the Saudi government, the UAE, some of these other governments that have signed up to this Board of Peace were speaking in grandiose terms about how peace was coming to the world and all of this. But they were very quick to point out there won't be any normalization of relations with Israel anytime soon. Look, this is a lifetime appointment by Donald Trump by himself. To chair this board where people are going to pay a lot of money to join, and it's supposedly going to sort of challenge the United Nations. I did one amusing thing. They actually, White House in its classic competence, managed to, in its official announcement, included Belgium in the members who joined the Board of Peace, and Belgium hasn't joined. In fact, as you know, the only European country that's joined, I think, is that famous that country that is famously committed to peace and democracy and security, Belarus. So
Well, I think Hungary and Bulgaria might be joining it too.
Maybe, but it's so far, I think it's. But anyway, it's just.
No, you're quite right. It's the Belarus dictatorship is up there in the Board of Peace. It's Orwell all over again.
It is.
Have we lost it there?
No, sorry. It is absolutely that. It is, but it is for Donald Trump. I mean, it's for Trump to, and I think to some extent, maybe in his wilder dreams, he sees it in the long term as a kind of a counterweight or a challenged alternative United Nations Security Council. But, that unless he gets, serious countries to join, which they're not going to, that's not going to happen.
Where do you think, Katy, this leaves Donald Trump domestically in America now? He's beginning the second year of his second term. He's dominated the headlines because of Greenland. He's doing it again because of this Board of Peace. But isn't there a danger that he begins to look a bit like the Grand Old Duke of York over Greenland?
I think there is a danger. I also think the other danger for him is that he just looks as though he's focusing on foreign affairs. We've seen Keir Starmer face that criticism in the UK. But certainly, I think it was telling that on the flight over from the US to Davos, you had his chief of staff, Susie Wiles, making the point to the travelling press pack that soon after Davos, the gathering of the global elite, he would be back in the US focusing on domestic issues and travelling across America, not leaving America, doing lots of these stops. And I think that speaks to, if you look at polling, I don't think US voters are particularly animated by Greenland, and if anything, it's negative, particularly this idea of taking it by force. And I think if it was a huge sum of money that they were paying, that would also be problematic. But the bigger issue he has is affordability and cost of living, and all this stuff does risk sometimes looking like a distraction from that.
And that is the problem, is it not, Jerry, that his biggest domestic issue is affordability, is not so much the economy, which is doing all right, but the affordability issue, the baked-in inflation from the Biden years and so on. And the more the headlines are dominated by Greenland and the Board of Peace or whatever else it is, that doesn't deal with the concerns of the American people.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, there's some interesting new polling that's been coming out this week. We've had some in the Wall Street Journal. Trump is underwater on pretty well every single issue, immigration included, the economy, very strikingly. And as you say, the affordability issue is there. And as you say, also, I think the sense, and as Katy points out, the sense that, he's paying attention. I had a very interesting conversation with a senior Democrat yesterday who said we would love him to offer to buy Greenland from Denmark, because we'll then campaign on saying Donald Trump wants to spend $1 trillion of your taxpayers' money to buy what he describes as a block of ice in the Arctic, and we'll spend $1 trillion of your money on healthcare. So that's a big political issue. Look, the only other thing I'll quickly say, just to really frighten your listeners and viewers, Andrew, is as Katy said, he's going back to the US. The first place he's going to go to Iowa. And you alert listeners and viewers will note that Iowa is the place where the first votes will be held in the presidential election of 2028 in less than 2 years' time right now. So, I'm not suggesting anything, but an interesting choice of place to go. The first state to vote in the Republican primary. Donald Trump, ineligible notionally at least to run in that election. That's where he's going.
Well, there's a massive storm coming to the eastern seaboard of the United States. We'll see if he makes it through that to get to Iowa. We'll leave it there for now. Thanks both to Gerry Baker and to Katy Bowles, both of whom were in Dallas, not Dallas, but in Davos this week. Probably wanted to be in Dallas instead.